Welcome to the Ask Falaskini, the Clarity Compass podcast. I'm proud to present Melanie Weller, speaker, author, neurotheologist, and time whisperer. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm so happy to be here. And I love what you're doing supporting people in midlife because a lot of people at that stage of life I find really fall through the cracks, at least in the medical system, which is where I've been for the last 30 years or so.
Melanie, can you tell us a bit more about yourself? How did you become a speaker, author, neurotheologist? That's something new for me. And time whisperer, of course. How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, it all started in the midst of my midlife crisis. And 30 years of physical therapy really gifted and athletic training. I was an athletic trainer before I went to physical therapy school. Gifted me this reputation as the body whisperer. And I trained with nationally and internationally renowned experts, and I collected credentials like some people collect fine wines. And still, there were others I couldn't figure out. And so I did more trainings and sought more credentials. And then my life fell apart. And I had a health crisis, marriage crisis, and lawsuit crisis all in very close proximity. And my uh, my life just wasn't making sense. And I, um, a couple of things happened in the midst of that. One, I turned to astrology to figure out, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of how I think that really ties in way more tightly to science than anyone's ever looked at it before. But in the midst of all of that, I had a patient walk into my office that had a suicide planned for that evening. And he was living in a nightmare of a hallucination where everyone's faces were melting, and he had been turned down by other healthcare professionals that didn't want to help him or didn't know what to do with him. And I certainly didn't think that I was the right answer, but we had a mutual contact referred him. And I thought he was coming over for like back pain or something like that. I had no idea that he was coming for these hallucinations. And my clinical expertise for a long, long time, since before social media existed, has been treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve in the body. And I thought, well, I'll decompress his vagus nerve. My heart just couldn't send him away because he was struggling so much. And so I decompressed his vagus nerve, and I knew I just had to show up more. And I really showed up for him not only in a professional capacity, but in a very spiritual capacity. And 90 minutes later, he was 90% better. And we really saved each other that day. He sent me a text later that night that said, Melanie, you saved my life, and not in the cute kind of way, because, and that's when he told me that if what I didn't help him, he had a suicide plan for that evening. And, and I really walked out with my fearless presence, because I had always been, I had all of these academic clinical credentials and a very unique set of soft skills to like strong intuition. And I had always kind of kept them separate, or the softer set skills were kind of my secret. And my patients over the years would tell you that they come to me for the soft skills, but they like that I have these credentials. So I know I can tell if something really, like if I say, stop messing around and go to your doctor, like they'll do it, like I know where that line is very clearly with things. But I still like, it's very powerful to be part of somebody's transformation like that. And I still kind of struggle with words, or I'll get tongue tied even. I feel a little tongue tied now, just trying to describe what it's like to be, uh, I think the universe conspired for this man hard to, I don't take, I think I really, his body, he really wanted to get better. What I learned from his body, and that I have seen over and over and over in patients since then, is that I could take my objective tests and talk about how he was living in rigor mortis and that his body thought it was dead and was telling his body was basically telling his brain it was dead. So then he had a behavioral drive to match that on the outside. And if anybody's listening that is tied to research and wants to study this, I've been asking people all over to like I would love to get looped in to get this studied because it every time I see this pattern, I like now I ask people if they are contemplating suicide, and the answer is either yes or no, but I feel like I'm dying on the inside. So it definitely goes with this sense of dying or desire to die, or like something is dying when your biomechanics get locked up like this and your vagus nerve goes into what I call a lockdown. It's not just compressed, but it's just really, really locked down. And, um, and the hard science is that our body, like our brains are 80% input. So our bodies are informing our brains. So if you need to, or you want to change how you're thinking, you have to change something about your body to make that happen. It has to come through the body. You can't just logic yourself into a different way of thinking. And part of my midlife crisis really blew I had spent many years in suicide ideation from the time I was very young, maybe even preteen, certainly middle school, high school, and it was just a tape that played over in my head. And my midlife crisis really blew that open and kind of reset that for me. And um and we know that there's lots of great evidence-based ways to do a lot of different things, but the evidence says that especially for mental health, but also for physical health, that nothing is more potent or protective than spirituality. And spirituality, they separate it out from religion. So spirituality is your relationship basically with your internal authority. Religion is your relationship with external authority.
Well, I like that definition. So spirituality is relationship with internal authority, and religion is relationship with external authority. I just love how you define it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's why they use some different words in the research, but it's the same definition. And like, for example, uh, if your mother was spiritual with or without being religious, you are 80% protected against depression because spirituality is 29% genetic.
Okay.
And spiritually strong adolescents are something like 35 to 75% less likely to experience depression and 40 to 80% less likely to develop substance abuse. And in the blue zones, where people, where they study longevity, which, certainly in midlife, this is, I know as once I got past 50, I don't remember exactly which movie, but there's a Star Trek movie where Jean-Luc Picard has the realization that he has more days behind him than he has ahead of him. And I think that's one of the things that really kind of smacks you in the face when you cross a midlife threshold in years. And spirituality is associated with 4 to 14 years increase in life expectancy, regardless of denomination or how you do it, having some attending faith-based services and having spiritual engagement. It reduces cardiovascular disease, reduces depression, reduces stress. You get better immune function, even reduces suicide. And that certainly can be a double-edged sword because when your spirituality connects you with your inner authority, that I think that I can see absolutely that goes with lower suicide rates. my experience with church is that church made me want to kill myself. Like church really supported that desire for me. But my church wasn't growing up was not particularly authoritarian, but my parents were very authoritarian, and the way that religion was talked about and applied in my house was very authoritarian. And so I didn't, I was always, uh, I was always told that however I was feeling was wrong, or, oh, no, that's not true. That's not the way it is, you know? And so I was always talked out of my inner authority or told that it was incorrect. And, and it's really important, you know, feelings are not facts necessarily, but they are fuel. You know, they're fuel for change and fuel to drive us for what we, you know, the things that we desire for our goals and aspirations. Uh, and I think part of me becoming a physical therapist and athletic trainer was really to connect myself with my body,
Mhm. Okay.
you know.
I like another quote of yours, the feelings are not facts. That is extremely important, especially when we're talking about spirituality. And then we say, this one has a low vibe and this one has a high vibe. And then we judge. But it's often that
Oh,
we are just triggered, that this person just triggers one of our either traumas, fears, or grudges. And that is why these feelings are not facts is extremely important. I really like it. How you
oh, yeah,
explain that.
yeah. Well, I would tell you, I have a pretty fiery personality. My astrology is pretty fiery. And like, you know, I do a lot of like stabbing it. I always say if I was going to be a superhero, I would be pneumatic woman and I would slash people's tires
Okay.
for going the wrong way on the one-way street in my neighborhood and all these, you know, but like there's like, but like I know that that feeling isn't, you know, that's not any, like I have the bandwidth to understand that that's something that I'm not going to act out. But we get these, you know, like we can have very, very powerful, aggressive feelings, you know, like all the way from love to hate to fear to, you know, but
I would like an insight from you. How do you validate your feelings? How do you know which feeling you have to follow and which feeling, like
mm,
smashing someone's
yeah.
car or
I have a very acute sense of how my body says yes and how my body says no
okay.
from head to toe. I can tell you how what my breath does when there's a yes, what my toes do when there's a yes, you know, what my head does when there's a yes, what my low back does, you know, what my hands do. Like I just have this very, like I've developed this language with my body. And this is part of what I teach when I work with patients, clients too. And it's part of how I guide my own treatment sessions with them is having this conversation, this somatic conversation with their body, like, like, tell me where the problem was. And I had a very, it was very hilarious to me conversation recently with another physical therapist who we come from, you know, we've both been in this for 30 plus years. We come from originally, like our original training is very similar. And then he took some craniosacral training. The craniosacral is a little more, it gives you an opportunity to tap a little bit more into your intuition, or like the energies are more subtle, you know, and you can, um, you know, and I certainly use a lot of imagery and uh, in my work and the way that I talk to patients and see the body. And he was talking, and I was treating him, and so he was asking me. He's like, "Well, how did you know that that was that part to go to that part of my body?" And I said, "Oh, I just like your like the." Mechanical tension of his body just showed me like that's where the pull was. It was,
Mhm.
and I had not realized how much of I took the pressure off of myself to be the medical intuitive so much. I'm like, just like let your body show me. I don't have to figure this out. You can tell me exactly what's wrong. And to like let the, you know, let the body show me where the tension is, and um you know, which part of the body wants to be treated first, because when you unravel people in the order that the body is guiding you in, I find you get much bigger results than if I just go on my clinical logic. And
Okay.
a lot of,
I have a question. Sorry for
yeah.
interrupting you. So you're talking a lot, or you're touching body cognition a lot, and
Hmm.
you're explaining how you work with body. And I'm really, I'm still, I use a lot of my body when I'm working with clients as well, or trying to, but
Hmm.
I'm still a lot in my head, and I try to apply a method to intuition, or at least to
Yeah.
say I try to justify my intuition, and I'm using like classical Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine from
Hmm.
India in order to let's say verify the result I get as an intuitive reader. So are you using the similar method, or you just trust your intuition?
No, no, no. Well, so there is, well, here's what I'll say in general, because, and I would say this applies to, it doesn't matter whether, and I'll tell you a little, I want to talk a little bit about how I use astrology in the body, but I can totally speak to the Ayurveda and Chinese medicine because there's a similarity between those and astrology. They're really all astrological time-based systems. But the, but even if I'm just looking at hardcore clinical through a hardcore clinical lens, uh, I would say 50 or 60% of people follow the textbook.
Okay.
Like, and I don't have to even, like, I just know how it's going to go. It's very predictable. It's, they fall in all the boxes, and I can explain it esoterically, I can spiritually, I can explain it scientifically, and it's very clear. Another 30% or so, 40% did not read the textbook before they showed up in my office, or like they're not following the textbook. But I have read this book before. It's not really the norm, but I can logic my way
Mm-hmm.
through it. It's not too far outside of the box. There's always about 10% of people that wrote their own textbook, and then I consider it my job to figure out how to read it and interpret it. And their bodies don't follow, uh they just don't follow the normal um sequence of
Mm-hmm.
events and the way that they've laid down their tension, and the like maybe even what part of the body wants to be fixed first. Like, for me, a lot of people, like, like they want cranios uh their cerebral spinal fluid flow
Mm-hmm.
restored first, and the base of the skull decompressed, or they want their breath restored for, to get the diaphragm unlocked and things like that. But
Are we in
some
line with like chiropractor knowledge here?
sort of, yeah, yeah, yeah. And but so when I turned to astrology to figure out what was happening with myself, what I realized is that all of these the symbols and the constellations are the same shape as our anatomical structures. So, for example, the ventricles of the brain that make cerebral spinal fluid are the same shape as the ram's horns that represent Aries, and in astrology, Aries rules the head. And our throat anatomy looks like the Taurus bull, and Taurus rules the throat. And our aortic arches are the same shape as a symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. Our kidneys sit in our low back like a set of scales, and Libra rules the kidneys and is represented by a set of scales. And beyond that, at least in the US and Australia, I would suspect uh, beyond as well, the populations with the highest levels of social injustice have the highest levels of kidney disease.
Mm-hmm.
So we embody the stress of injustice at the level of the kidneys. And certainly scales are justice in our collective society as well. And this works down at the cellular level too. A molecule of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, that's the source for all cellular function, muscle contraction, is the same shape as the stars in the Aries constellation. And it's a very Aries archetypal thing to, that fuel, that initiation, you know, and Saturn rules the bones, and our long bones are organized in Saturnian circles, concentric rings. And our liver cells, the liver is ruled by Jupiter, and our liver cells look like the planet Jupiter. And so I created a form of energy medicine, and I work with people both online and in person to get your nervous system aligned with the solar system. And there's lots of amazing evidence about how that, or amazing scientific research about how that works. But I think that it's well, one, I think this is our fundamental science hidden in plain sight. And because most of us don't have dark skies, we have so much light pollution, we don't know what we're missing, what information we're missing from the sky. But it's very powerful to tap into those. I think it's also our deepest spirituality, this as above, so below, and really taps you into your power to either create your own reality, or sometimes you have to make peace with reality too.
Mm-hmm.
That you're just in this, like you're just in a phase, and like this is a time of life that's gonna feel like a crunch, and it's going to pass.
Okay, I have another question. So when you're talking about astrology, do you have an opinion on the body design that should be a concept that upgrades astrology and also talks about similar things that you're talking?
Um, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like, do I have to like the body? I mean, we
No,
are
no.
made in the image of the
There's
zodiac.
this system that
Hmm.
mathematically and let's say
Oh,
esoterically has upgraded astrology, and it's called body design.
oh,
And
I'm not familiar with body design.
okay, so I was just thinking because um, uh, you went even deeper than this system. So I was under impression
Yeah.
that you
Yeah. No, I don't know. I do well, and I will tell you. So in the Vedic system, uh, they're um, like the Hindu deity Ganesh is like our brainstem and cerebellum together look like the Hindu deity Ganesh, and Ganesh is a remover of obstacles, and it's the same, and that's basically what our brainstem and cerebellum do for us too. And Lakshmi's four arms represent the four chambers of the heart, and Durga's like the sacrum, and her arms represent the nerves as they come out of the sacrum in our low back, and all of these. And even in traditional Chinese medicine, though I'm not fluent in that, but I had this discussion recently um, with a pharmaceutical researcher of all people, which was really interesting. That in Chinese medicine, they're all allegories for our anatomy and physiology.
Mhm.
Like ancient people really understood that, but they told it in story form. And we are fundamentally storytellers above everything else. But the kind of where this all of this these ancient systems really intersect with modern science is in terms of time, because like whether or not you believe in astrology, that it has anything to say, the zodiac is a clock.
Mhm.
And the research says that the common thread between mental health diagnoses, neurological diagnoses, and orthopedic diagnoses is time perception and processing. And so, for example, if you're very anxious, maybe living in a lot of fear, and you have a lot of part of how that expresses in the brain is that you'll have more activity in your amygdala
Mhm.
in your brain, particularly the right side. And I could also say this would apply to if you hold God in an authoritarian as a perspective, like God is more punishing than benevolent in your
Mhm.
world. You'll have more of this fear. And your amygdala slow down time perception. And like if you've ever been about to fall or have a car accident or something like that, and you feel like time slows down, that's because your amygdala literally slow down your time perception and processing.
Mhm.
But when you get your amygdala more organized in their ability to do that through somatic practices, through like psychotherapy does this very well through EMDR. Your amygdala responds really well to eye movements. Your left amygdala, you can when you have an orgasm, you can thank your left amygdala because it's very involved in that. But when you get this, your time perception and processing organized, then your mental health is better, your physical health is better, and all of our well, I won't say necessarily spiritual systems, but maybe religions overwhelmingly are about your relationship with time because they usually come with an afterlife philosophy.
Mhm.
And if you base your how you behave in this life on what's going to happen to you after you die, like what your relationship with eternal time. So I deal with a lot of people that have religious trauma, and a number of them have had their parents cut them off because they wouldn't toe the religious party line. And because the parent thought because the child wasn't fully immersed, like fully believing in the way that they did, that they were going to go to hell for staying in touch with their child.
Okay.
So so that drives, does that make sense? So it drives how you spend your time here, and there's certainly some, I mean, there are some, most all religions have good rules, like you shouldn't kill somebody else. You should, like, there's a lot of kindness and altruism that is kind of woven in to all of that. But, um, my atheist friends, they, they live their life because they don't believe there's anything else. And so they're just here to get the most out of it right now. And so it's all about your relationship with time. So when like I come from the trauma informed world and I've taught trauma informed somatics and practices for a long time, and you will never sell trauma informed care to the whole world because not everybody wants to deal with their trauma. But people would like to have a different relationship with their time, more playtime, more downtime, more me time, more family time, more creative time, whatever that is. And you can then through the way through the archetypes of the zodiac, you can then like if you want, like in astrology, Leo rules the heart and is associated with play. And we instinctively know that if you want to be more playful, you need to have a lighter heart or like an open heart. So you would do more, for me clinically, I would teach more exercises that are closer to where the heart is
Mhm.
to get the heart to be able to have more physical movement and freedom within your chest so that you can go live a more playful life and feel like you have more playtime.
Okay. That's a big one. I
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, like, I mean, I have, if I was going to plant my stake on somewhere with clinicians, it would be that nobody treats the rib cage well enough.
Mhm.
That we really don't look at that. It's a huge chunk of our body, and most of us move through our ribs like a block of wood.
Yeah, agree.
And that's why people like breath work. But
Mhm.
just because your lungs are moving doesn't, I mean, there's so much more in your chest to get organized there. And I will tell you, I've treated a lot of breath workers, breath work instructors, people that, but I'll tell you, breath work instructors have the absolute worst rib cage mechanics of anyone I've ever treated. Like, and it makes total sense because we all do what we need to heal ourselves,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
so
so they are driven
once
to
they
that
have
breath work
problem in
practice.
that area, they start breath work and
Exactly. Right. Totally.
okay.
But the teachers have way worse mechanics than the students do, which I think is always, and it's like, I mean, it's just the way it all works, but it's delightfully entertaining to me. And
Mhm.
uh,
Okay, I have two more topics that
yeah,
I'd like to address before we finish. You talk so much about the nervous system. For me, one of the most important, um, let's say, steps in my 12-step Phoenix process is grounding. Because I believe that the nervous system needs to be grounded in order to be able to self-regulate. What's your opinion on grounding?
I could not agree more. I think people's nervous systems are like blinds that get drawn up in the body, and you have to you really do have to kind of pull it back down. And sometimes I do that quite literally for people. The but yes, I so I'm writing my book that has all of this in and all of this information in it. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about, like when we talk about the zodiac and the hero's journey are the same thing.
Mhm.
It's the and we think we're being really clever when we create all these new systems, but even like I love that your system is 12 steps, it probably follows the zodiac at some level too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like the 12 step, like Alcoholics Anonymous and those programs do also, like it's, like we're just doing the same thing in a different way.
Agree 100%. It's also
And
Jung's teaching.
yes, but I think rather than going forwards through the hero's journey, we need to go backwards through the hero's journey and start with, and that would be starting with Pisces, starting with spirituality, starting with coming home to yourself. Your body is home. You are home. You are the home. And Pisces rules the feet. And starting with that grounding, I think is the most important step. And for me, that very often looks like different foot exercises,
Mhm.
and really bringing your attention to your feet, breathing through your feet, um, even rubbing your feet with a soft cloth, but really paying attention to your feet because shoes give us permission to be sloppy
Mhm.
in how we move. And, spiritual practices have so many beautiful stories around washing feet and anointing feet and different things like that. And taking care of your feet is a beautiful, beautiful way to stay grounded. And your feet are mapped in the very center of your brain, like deep in the groove between the two, the right and left side. And things that are in the middle of the brain are about you. Like your hands are mapped on the outside of the brain, and they're more about your relationship with the outside world. But uh, taking care of your feet is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do to ground yourself and to um, make your body feel like it is cared for.
Yeah, and it's also you mentioned that you worked a lot with athletes in the beginning, and it's also the weakest point of most of the athletes that they don't give their.
It's a Yeah, no, I mean, I will tell you, I've had like the last 15 years, like Neptune is finally leaving Pisces, but I have had Neptune and Pisces for me has been a whole mess of foot problems. And I'm really happy to have it be moving. And my foot has gotten better as it's uh, uh, as Neptune has just very recently left Pisces. But I mean, it's interesting to look at because I did a lot of that looking in hindsight, like, oh, all of my foot problems started here, and I have, my mother has a lot of foot problems. My grandmother had a lot of foot problems. Like I have a whole mother line story through that. And so I have adapted a lot of what I do to deal with the epigenetic aspects, and how my mother line is living in my feet, or I know that when I'm healing way more than just myself, that it's part of a bigger thing. The other place that's really powerful for grounding is your breath, because your diaphragm, your heart sits on top of your diaphragm, just like a sunrise or sunset sits on the horizon. And in astrology, Leo rules the heart, and the sun rules is associated with Leo. So like that Leo sun sits on top of your diaphragm. Your heart is the sun, and it and your diaphragm. Astrology doesn't really. They just usually considers your whole body the earth. But I think our diaphragms very much are our personal earth, because if we're not breathing, we're not here. We're not earthbound. And so breath work is great. In all humans, the right side of the diaphragm has more muscle mass than the left. And so theoretically, the right side will always win. It's just because our liver's over there, and the way uh, it just lays down more tissue in response to having more surface area contact from your liver than it does from organs on the other side of your body. And most of us are right-handed. And even if you're left-handed, you're living in a right-handed world and having to adapt. And so one of my core exercises I call helical breathing, and part of it is twisting to the left and breathing into the backside of your heart,
Mhm.
just to take yourself out of that right diaphragm dominance.
Great. I have one more topic that I want to address before we conclude this podcast, and that is gut health. So, how important is gut health, and what we eat and how we treat it for our mental and, let's say, overall well-being?
Yeah. You cannot out regulate a bad diet. You can't, there are not enough nervous system regulation exercises to counter a bad diet. Um, I, but also, I get a lot of referrals from registered dietitians for people that aren't absorbing nutrients very well, because especially your vagus nerve is very involved in nutrient absorption. And if you don't have good vagus nerve function, it can be hard to absorb the nutrients that you are ingesting. And some people will eat really well and just not absorb it. And so it's not an, so you need some relationship of both for better health. So you need your nervous system, to be able to access the more calming parts of your nervous system through your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. And you need good diet. I think that, um, sometimes a lot of disordered eating and eating disorders are, trauma responses.
Mhm.
And sometimes it can be healthy to give yourself a little more flexibility in your diet, or to, um, I'll tell you my story with it quickly. I was introduced to functional medicine in the 90s, um, and what became very hypervigilant of good food, or like, that my diet needed to be really um, perfect, and that the food industry had made everything a threat. And I could make kale and green beans bad for you and all this kind of, like, it was just like, like even good food, I was very, uh, yeah, I got to the point where so much food felt threatening to my body. And this wasn't conscious, this was all happening subconsciously. And then I developed all these food sensitivities. And part of what really helped me was kind of power posing over my food and saying, look, you work for me, or like, that what I need gets to be nourished, that I can trust my body to eliminate what it doesn't need. And I was really living in this role of being the victim of the food industry and the food that got to my table, and taking away, just working on that relationship with food was very powerful in influencing how I digested things and getting rid of my food sensitivities.
Amazing story. So, Melanie, before uh, we wrap up, I would like our listeners and our viewers to know where they can reach you. What is the
Uh,
best place to get in touch, where
yeah.
we can get your book?
Yeah. Well, the best place is on my website, which is my name, melanieweller.com. And I've got a bunch of free resources there. I teach a free rewiring religion class once a month where we talk about nervous system and spiritual beliefs and religious trauma. Um, I'm on Substack, and for my paid subscribers, I do monthly healings, group healings, and but that's all on my website. When the book is finally ready, it will all be there too. I'm on Instagram at Embody Your Star, but I'm not super active on social media, and I have my own podcast as well called Fearless Presence.
Okay, I will include as many links as possible in the description below. Thank you for all these wonderful insights, Mel.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate you sharing your platform with me. My karmic backstory is my childhood trauma is all about lost voice, and so it really means a lot to me when somebody's willing to share their platform with me.
Thank you.